Welcome, Gunrunner.
On this channel over the years I've done lots of videos on failed add-ons of different types, be they storage devices, actual expansions of some kind, or even weird and wonderful controllers that added new ways to play your favourite games. But it struck me the other day that one kind of add-on I've never really explored that much on the channel is CD add-ons. I'm not really sure why, so I thought it was about time we did a deep dive on such expansions. Sure, I've done a full Amazing Facts episode on the Sega Mega CD and talked about the PC Engine CD quite a bit on this channel before too, but these are somewhat successful CD add-ons, especially the latter of those two, and what I want to explore here are the ones that didn't grab the market, were never really supported, and vanished from trace almost as soon as they arrived. 5 such examples in fact, including at least a couple that you probably didn't know about. So with that background to this month's mini documentary out the way, it's time to start looking at 5 failed CD add-ons.
Just what is it that you want to do?
We're going to have a good time.
Epic fail.
Let's start off the video with this one, because when a lot of people think of failed CD add-ons, they visualise the Atari Jaguar CD. So let's go back to 1993, with Atari announcing their revolutionary 64-bit Jaguar console, with media surprised that it would be cartridge-based. But Atari quickly quashed all those queries by revealing that their new console would be joined by a CD add-on within a year of release, thus going down a similar route to the Sega Mega CD and NEC Super CD-ROM of course. This would give Jaguar users the best of both worlds and also allow Atari to refine the new technology and to make relevant upgrades in the meantime. The initial specs for the Jaguar CD suggested that it would offer only a few basic upgrades over the existing Jaguar hardware, in the form of additional storage, CD audio and full motion video, along with the option of adding an MPEG video cartridge for video CD compatibility. But then Atari announced that the CD add-on had been delayed until 1995. There were lots of different stories flying around that explained why, such as the new games not being ready, Atari wanting to build a bigger user base for the actual console itself first, and most interestingly, a need to revise the hardware to enable the Jaguar to better compete with the upcoming Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. But then 1995 came around and the Jaguar CD was ready for release, along with the first stream of new CD-based games. The much rumoured hardware upgrades were nowhere to be seen, and the specs of the new unit were identical to what was initially announced after the Jaguar's debut. A lot of people criticised this decision, and the initial run of games was doing little to change people's minds. The Jaguar was already selling very poorly, and the Jaguar CD did little to change that, with both being discontinued the following year with only 15 releases in the CD format. To most people it seemed like absolute madness to release such an add-on for an already failing console, but you have to realise that Atari were hoping the Jaguar CD would reverse the console's fortunes. But given how badly Atari had already bungled the Jaguar CD was very much doomed from the start. Much of the early CD software was very lacklustre, with titles like Blue Lightning, Baldies and Primal Rage being criticised for being on CD in the first place when it was pretty clear they could have played from cartridges just as well. Better in the case of Primal Rage in fact, with its horrendous loading times. Promised big name CD focused titles like Mortal Kombat 3, Black Ice White Noise and Demolition Man never arrived, with around 90% of all announced Jaguar CD games being cancelled due to its failure in the market. What's particularly interesting is that the initial run of Jaguar CD units produced by Philips, of just 25,000 units, sold out almost immediately, and Atari had another 25,000 units on order. However, it's widely thought that the second run were never actually produced, and this is the reason why working Jaguar CD add-ons are now so rare and sought after.
Epic fail.
Our next one here is something very different indeed, and probably one that you wouldn't expect, as in 1990, well-known budget games label Codemasters, who are of course still around in the present day, shocked the world of 8-bit computing by announcing that they were going to be releasing a special CD packed with games for play on the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64 and Amstrad CPC. Now this wouldn't really be an add-on in the traditional sense. Codemasters wouldn't be supplying a special CD drive of any kind to use with your computer. Instead they would supply a special adapter that plugged into the joystick port of your micro and allowed you to use a normal CD player instead. This adapter would also come with a CD containing an incredible 30 different games, all for a cost of just £20. It almost sounded too good to be true. All of the games would be re-releases of existing Codemasters budget titles and included many of their most popular releases, including the likes of Dizzy, Advanced Pinball Simulator, Fast Food, Fruit Machine Simulator and Ninja Massacre. There would be a few small differences between the three versions, due to some games not being released on particular formats, but overall the quality of the Codemasters CD collection was really high. The magazines at the time were also really positive about it, and it seemed like this could be the next big thing, with other software houses soon following suit. However, despite the rather bargainous price, it failed to sell at all, with Codemasters admitting that perhaps they overestimated the amount of home computer users who also owned CD players in their homes. The Spectrum version was the first one released, and the only one to sell in any real numbers at all. The C64 version sold so few copies in fact that it's now one of the most rare and sought after collector's items for the computer. Due to the poor sales of these versions, the Amstrad CPC edition wasn't released at all, despite being shown in several magazines of the time. Codemasters also announced that an NES version was in the pipeline too, that would work in exactly the same way, but would only contain 3 or 4 games per CD, a bit like their Quattro cartridges that came out later on, which was nowhere near as attractive. However, despite being announced in issue 8 of GamePro magazine with a planned release date of later that year, it was never even previewed. It's since been stated by Codemasters co-founder David Darling that the NES version was just an idea and never really got anywhere, as there were some significant technical problems to overcome. Shame, as this would have been a really interesting add-on for the NES.
Epic fail.
Now, I've talked about the Sega 32X add-on a lot on this channel, and the many baffling decisions that led to its release, most notably in my Amazing Facts episode on the add-on that I've linked in the description. But in this particular video, I want to focus on by far the most baffling decision that was made after the announcement of the 32X add-on, and that was Sega's pledge that they would also be releasing a range of games that required both the mushroom-shaped unit as well as Sega's previous Mega Drive add-on, the Mega CD. Given that both the 32X and Mega CD had hardly set the world alight sales-wise, meaning the amount of people who owned both was even smaller still, it just seems so strange to waste more money and resources on games that would support both of them. And speaking of those games, just 5 titles were released for the 32X CD combo in the form of Supreme Warrior, Slam City with Scottie Pippen, Corpse Killer, Fahrenheit, and a greatly enhanced version of the infamous Night Trap. None of these titles were massively impressive in all honesty, but at least they showed that the Mega CD could now do proper full motion video without all the grainy pixels and colour limiting we'd seen in the existing versions. Although I have to say that it would be quite interesting to see what this add-on combination could do if it was really pushed to its limits. So come on, homebrewers. One fairly logical, if ill-conceived, reason why Sega chose to push this new format is that they intended to create a second version of the Neptune console that featured a built-in CD drive. I talked about this also unreleased system in my cancelled Sega consoles video, so if you want to know more then check that out. I'll put a link for that one down in the description also.
Epic fail.
Back in the mid to late 80s, the 16-bit computer war was very much a thing in playgrounds across the UK. ST vs Amiga was quickly taking over from the Spectrum vs Commodore 64 arguments. This battle has been documented a huge amount over the years, as has Commodore's foray into the world of CD-based Amigas with the CD-TV and CD-32. But nobody ever seems to talk about Atari's own adventures with the compact disc, so let's put that right. As early as 1985, the very year the Atari ST made its debut in fact, Atari were talking about a CD add-on for their 16-bit computer. And indeed, in this CES show that very same year, they showed off such a device for the first time. It would be known as the Atari Optophile, but its product number was the CD-ROM, and many just referred to it as the ST CD, understandably so. The ST CD was widely talked about in magazines at the time, most notably the hugely popular ST format, and people were getting pretty excited about such a concept. You have to remember that CD was only just starting to become a thing as far as music was concerned, so adding a CD drive to a powerful home computer seemed like utter fantasy, but there was Atari doing just that. Sam Trammell was proudly proclaiming that Atari was set to lead the way with introducing CD technology in computing, and that this would give the ST a big edge over its rivals. But then nothing. Atari had gone into complete radio silence on the ST CD. They never showed it at any more shows, and we never heard about it again, and people were left wondering what the hell happened to it. Surely the ST CD wasn't dead already, especially after all that fanfare. 3 years went by before Atari made any further announcements about the ST CD, when they showed the unit in action again at the 1988 C-Bit show. This event was soon reported in the September 1988 issue of ST Amiga Format, who even delivered a full review of the add-on. Atari CEO Sam Trammell stated that the reason for the delay was that Atari wanted to not only deliver the unit less than a $500 price point, but they also didn't want to launch it without any software. And this was the next thing they would unveil, showing Grollier's Encyclopedia and Firelink's Visual French-English Dictionary at the show, which were both seen running using real STs with high-resolution monochrome displays, and you have to love that one of the images they showed was of naked people. Even back then, the first thing people searched on a computer was porn. Announcements about more software soon followed after the expo, including various music packages, the American Heritage Dictionary, Roget's Electronic Thesaurus, the World Almanac, and most excitingly, Microsoft Bookshelf. But then Atari suddenly went quiet again, with magazines at the time reporting that just 500 Optophile units had been produced by the company, which were nearly all supplied to business users rather than retail customers, with American aircraft manufacturer Boeing named as their biggest client. There was still no retail release, no actual price, and no more software announced either. Then another 3 years would pass by before it was seen again, this time at the 1991 C-Bit show, where it now looked very different indeed. The Optophile name had been dropped completely, and it was now called the CD-AR-505. The new unit was also around half the size of the original, much more modern and compact looking, with a motorised CD slot rather than the bulky tray of the old unit. Atari stated that this new double-speed drive was much faster, more reliable, and much cheaper to produce than the previous version, once again blaming manufacturing costs for a lack of a retail release. Now this might sound pretty positive, but this was actually the last time we'd see the Atari ST CD, and like the earlier model, it quickly disappeared without a trace. Although Atari never stated why it never went into production, it's likely that the rapidly declining ST market, the failure of the rival Amiga CD-TV, and the announcement of the ST's replacement, the 32-bit Falcon, had a lot to do with its ultimate cancellation. Now there is a little bit more to this lengthy story that I've had to condense quite a bit for this particular video, so if you do want to know more about the trials and tribulations of the ST CD, then check out my standalone video on the unit that I've linked down in the description.
Epic fail.
When I reveal the utter stupidity of this last entry, I think everyone watching this is going to very much agree that I saved the best until last. You see, this has to be the only example of a commercially available CD-based add-on that had absolutely no software released for it at all. Absolutely none. But before I explain the CD part of things, I just want to do a quick recap on the NEC SuperGrafx itself, as it's critically important to the story here. You see, when people talk about failed consoles, the SuperGrafx is often one of the first to get mentioned. In fact, I'd argue it's the winner of the top prize as far as failures go. because not only was it a huge failure for NEC, but directly followed on from a hugely successful console in the PC Engine, which should have given it an easy head start, especially as it was backwards compatible with the Hudson Soft developed machine. The original PC Engine sold over 7 million units worldwide, with nearly 700 games released during its commercial life, and was recently re-released as a mini console by current owners of the Hudson Soft brand, Konami. It also claimed several firsts, such as being the very first CD-ROM drive on a console, which is very important to this particular story, as well as being the first system released in the 16-bit console generation, arriving in 1987, a full year before the Sega Mega Drive debuted in Japan and 3 years before the Super Nintendo. The final announcement of the SuperGrafx followed lots of rumours and speculation about what NEC had planned for their next-gen system, including some failed negotiations with arcade giants Namco to acquire their mysterious 16-bit Super System console. I've actually done a story-off video on this very subject some time ago, so if you want to know more about what could have been, then click that link in the description. Given that the PC Engine was known for its small form factor, people were pretty surprised by the big brutish design of the SuperGrafx. It really couldn't have been a bigger departure, but boy does it look cool. This is another important part of the story that I'll come back to, so bear with me. Compared to the PC Engine, the SuperGrafx had 4 times the amount of main RAM and a second video chip with its own video RAM. It also included a priority controller chip, which allowed the output of both video chips to be combined in various ways to create clever effects such as multiple playfields, and one of the key marketing messages of the SuperGrafx was that it could play all your existing PC Engine games as well as lots of new ones that would take advantage of this extra hardware. NEC also announced 2 new add-ons. The first was an accessory called the Power Console, designed to add a full flight yoke, throttle and keypad to the SuperGrafx that would slide over the entire console, and the second was a SuperGrafx specific CD drive that would not only allow you to play all your existing PC Engine CD games, but also new SuperGrafx enhanced CD based titles too. Interestingly, neither of these were ever released, due to the epic failure of the console. However, NEC did offer an initial way to use the existing CD-ROM drive with their new console, while people waited for the new version of the add-on to arrive. But this was less than ideal. Now you might remember me talking about the much more bulky design of the SuperGrafx, especially when compared to the extremely petite PC Engine, and this was the main problem here, because it stopped you being able to connect the CD drive in the usual way, and there was no way it could be incorporated into the clever suitcase-like package that already existed. So the solution was a new interface unit called the RAU30, catchy name, I'm sure you'll agree. This unit came in 2 parts and was actually larger than the original PC Engine itself. You had a small shuttle-like grey connector that slotted into the back of your SuperGrafx that had a cable coming out the back that went into a white box that was the exact size of the original console, so it could be plugged into the CD-ROM 2 interface unit. This had to be the most ridiculously bulky and bizarre add-on ever created, even if it did ultimately allow you to use your PC Engine CD games on your SuperGrafx. I mean, look at the mess sprawled across that desk, with these photos courtesy of the excellent Nicole Express blog that I've linked down in the description, which contains lots of excellent technical info too, so go check it out. It's said that less than 100,000 SuperGrafx consoles were sold in total. It only ever had 5 games released for it, and was never released outside of Japan, so it's probably no wonder that so few people know about this add-on, and I'm not entirely sure why anyone would even want to get one. I can't quite believe this thing even exists. And that ends my look at 5 failed CD add-ons. Are there any others you can think of that I should have included here, or do you have some stories about owning one of these that you want to share? I always love to read your views and comments, so please get typing below this video. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube members for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular: for the much appreciated pledges: D. Vaughan, Albert Davis, Richard Baker, Martin Wiggins, Peter Grantham, Bernard Santu, Mins, Classic Gamer 74, Josh Hartman, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitson, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Seth A. Robinson, Climatorn, Carl Olsen, Mark Strickland, Big Chuzzle, Carl Cloping, Black Siren, John Alberino, Crispy Cream, Justin Cooney, Luke Boynton, Sarah B, Richard Tate, Tailboy 2011 and Election Star Collapse. If you also want to help support this channel, you can now join as a member for as little as £2 a month, where you'll get access to exclusive videos and updates and much more besides. Just click the button on my community page to get started. My Patreon is also still available if you prefer to support me in other ways too. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.